Dubbed the most hardcore and realistic survival show in history, the Wilderness Survival Challenge is officially back. All you have to do is survive until the very end on Vancouver Island, and you could walk away with a cash prize of $500,000. But the price is far from small. You're only allowed to bring 10 items, and you must constantly face off against apex predators on the island. If it were you, how long do you think you could last? The first guy to drop in is Larry. His LZ was backed up against a sheer, vertical cliff. He had to scale the steep grade to get into the timber and find a spot to pitch his tent. After bushwhacking a bit, he finally located a clearing near the ocean. He used a large tree as a main support pillar and pitched his rain tarp. Then he dragged over a heavy log to pin the edge of the tarp down. Now, even heavy rain and brutal wind wouldn't collapse it. But taking a second look, he immediately called himself an idiot for building a shelter so close to the water. If the tide surged, he'd get washed right out to sea. Realizing his mistake, he quickly broke down camp to relocate. Before joining the challenge, Larry was an electrician. Since childhood, he had a massive passion for the wilderness, but had to kill that dream at 18 to hustle and provide for his family for 26 long years. Now that his kids are all grown and married, he finally has the time to chase his old dream. With his wife fully backing him, he stepped up to this challenge. To lock down a campsite before dark, Larry pushed through heavy rain, grinding step by step through brutal, technical terrain. Finally, after 2.5 hours, he found a relatively flat piece of ground next to a small creek. Then he started chopping wood to build his shelter. He leaned a ridgepole onto a massive tree trunk, then draped his rain tarp over it. Next, he carved 2 wooden stakes to anchor the tarp on both sides. Inside the shelter, he used a sturdy stick to prop it up and create headspace. In no time, a small but bomb-proof shelter was fully operational. Looking at his shelter blending into the wild, Larry couldn't hold back a highly satisfied smile. The second participant to drop into this episode is Desmond, who pulled a pretty solid LZ. Right in front of him is a small, babbling creek, a water source. The most critical factor in wilderness survival was solved the second boots hit the ground. Next up, scouting a solid location to build a shelter. But the moment he stepped into the timber, he started finding fresh bear scat every 2 steps, which immediately spiked his anxiety. Before taking on the challenge, Desmond was a military veteran who served for 7 years and 10 months and saw combat in multiple deployments. When asked what he'd do if he ran into a black bear, he replied, "If anyone sees me fighting a bear, they better help the bear." If I hadn't watched the rest of the clip, I would have believed him. But before he even saw a bear, just hearing a noise in the brush made him panic, terrified his food stash would attract them. He quickly found a large tree and strung up a bear hang for his food. The third participant to drop is Kate. During her insertion, she stepped into the river, so her boots were soaked. Her top priority right now was to quickly set up camp to stay dry and maintain core temp. Back home, Kate was a wildland firefighter, and she has a 4-year-old daughter and another baby girl still nursing. To set a strong example for her kids, she decided to use this challenge to prove her grit. Shortly after pushing into the dense timber, Kate located a clearing. After clearing the brush, she hauled over a heavy log, rested one end on a stump, and used a forked branch to secure the other end. Then she threw her rain tarp over it. Didn't need to be complex, just functional enough to survive the night. The fourth participant to drop is Tracy, weighing in at a solid 440 pounds. Right out of the gate, she flexed her raw power by uprooting an entire willow tree barehanded. If a massive grizzly saw that, it'd probably grab its cubs and buy a ticket out of there overnight. But she didn't do it just to flex. She did it to clear a widowmaker that high winds could blow down on her, because she planned to build her shelter right there. Tracy is a former military vet and cop. Her parents are still alive, and she already has grandkids. With her kids grown and moved out, her only constant companion now is her small dog. For her, this challenge is like a spiritual vision quest. She lashed saplings between 2 large trees, then strung her rain tarp across them. Finally, she used 2 small branches to prop it up. After her hasty shelter was up, she hit the beach to wash her face. The side in front of her stopped her dead in her tracks. The shoreline was absolutely loaded with fresh seafood. Looked like enough rations to last 2.5 years. But she didn't celebrate because before drop-off, the show had briefed them. Due to a red tide event, most of the shellfish in this AO are packed with toxins that even boiling water can't kill. So she had to stay extremely cautious. Meanwhile, in another sector, Desmond was still bushwhacking, trying to find a camp location. Spotting more and more bear sign along the way kept his stress levels pinned at maximum. Right then, a blood-curdling roar echoed from somewhere nearby, making him go pale. Cold sweat poured out. Unsure where the threat was, he tried yelling to intimidate whatever it was. Who knew he'd get a roar right back? Having never faced a scenario like this, he didn't say a word, just turned and bolted. He sprinted nonstop to the beach before his racing heart finally slowed down. Still feeling exposed, he planned to saw some wood to make a torch. But his adrenaline was so high, he accidentally snapped his saw. If he was debating tapping out before, the writing was clearly on the wall now. The production crew barely had time to sit down before getting his radio call for extraction. It was obvious Desmond was genuinely terrified. He set the record for the fastest tap out in the show's history. If he hurried home, he'd probably still make it for dinner. Night fell rapidly over the island. To prep for a midnight bear ambush, Tracy kept her trusty axe right by her side. Honestly, with her size and strength, if a fight broke out, every animal within a 10-mile radius would probably pack up and move out overnight. Over in his sector, Larry was also getting harassed by bears. But he didn't back down. He stood his ground and yelled right back at them. The next morning, Kate woke up absolutely crushed. Other than her down sleeping bag, every piece of her gear was soaked by the rain. She had no choice. Time for damage control. She quickly relocated, built a new frame, and pitched the high side tight against the dirt. Laid down a blue waterproof tarp underneath. Thinking it through, staying dry shouldn't be that hard. But will reality match her plan? Day 5 hit. The 5th participant was revealed, Justin. Right now, he was strolling the beach in flip-flops. Recently discharged from the military, Justin clearly hadn't adapted to civilian life yet. 15 years of service left a deep impact on him, and transitioning back to the civilian world was a massive struggle. To better reintegrate with his family and society, Justin hoped this challenge would spark a real change in him. While hiking from the beach into the timber, he randomly stumbled upon a wandering Donald duck. Since it wasn't dinner time yet, Justin decided to give it a pass for now. To him, securing a sustainable food source was the mission objective. But after a long day of bushwhacking, he couldn't even find a single wild mushroom. Then he approached a small creek. That same Donald duck from earlier was now lying dead on the ground. After a close inspection, Justin saw zero signs of trauma on the duck's body. Ruling out drowning, it was highly likely it died from toxins. He wasn't going to risk eating it without being 100% sure, but leaving it there would attract apex predators to his camp. Weighing his options, he decided to give it a simple burial at sea. Participant number 6 is Mike. After studying Season 1 of the survival show, he picked up some pro strats from the legend Erlend. Right after drop-off, he found kelp and seaweed along the beach. Even pulled a massive kelp root. Took a bite, sure enough, fresh and crunchy. Aside from the heavy saltwater taste, it was totally solid. After a quick gritty breakfast, Mike took advantage of the low tide to set a crab trap at the river mouth. Wasn't expecting to pull king crab, but anything to put calories in the tank was a win. Before joining the challenge, Mike was an Air Force survival instructor for 8 years, so his wilderness survival skills were absolutely top tier. This challenge was the perfect op to prove his elite status and stack some extra retirement cash. When he spotted a massive pile of bear scat on the ground, he didn't flinch. He actually wanted to track it and make friends with the bear. Participant number 7 is Randy, a guy whose background perfectly matches the mission. Formerly an outdoor survival instructor, spending long periods living deep in the wild turned him from a clean-cut guy into a legit mountain man. However, this was his first time surviving solo in the bush for this kind of extended duration. Even though he knew the ocean was packed with resources, he hadn't figured out a fishing strategy yet. So he decided to stick to what he does best, setting traps. This simple deadfall mechanism, combined with rocks, can deliver massive kinetic force. Since he couldn't find good rocks, he temporarily used logs instead. Figured crushing a couple of wild rabbits wouldn't be an issue. This white-haired older guy is named David. Looks intimidating, but it's just his exterior. As a divorced father, he busted his tail to raise his 3 kids. Even though he was a missionary in Brazil for 15 years, he had almost zero actual wilderness survival experience. But that didn't dent his absolute resolve to secure that $500K. His 3 kids were fully supporting him too. Back on the beach, David also started making moves. Tied a hook to his line, baited it, and tossed it into the surf. Whether he landed a fish or not didn't rely on skill, it was purely up to the RNG gods. Day 6 hit. Mike hit the beach to check his net right on schedule. From a distance, he spotted a fish head breaking the surface. Initially, he would have been hyped just to score 1. Who knew that when he hauled the net in, he'd find 2 more wild carp? This time, he was absolutely ecstatic. Instantly gave himself a pro-tier nickname, 3 Fish. First, he roasted one for lunch. The leftovers he couldn't finish, he buried in a sand pit cache, covering it with moss and kelp to mask the scent. This was his covert, all-natural wilderness fridge. Now, he didn't have to stress about starving for a few days. Over in her sector, Kate had rebuilt and reinforced her shelter, but its waterproofing was still failing. If she wanted a stable base camp, she needed a dry patch of ground. She tucked it in the gap between 2 massive trees, laid down crossbeams to support a roof and tarp, and quickly knocked out an outdoor kitchen setup. To stop the rain from blowing straight into her shelter, she decided to rig a large door. First, she secured a crossbeam over the entrance, then lashed saplings tightly together and hung them from it. Finally, used a pole to prop up one end of the beam. A manually operated door was fully functional. After half a day of grinding, it was time to boil a cup of water to reward herself. But while chopping wood, she slipped up. The axe bit right into the back of her hand. Blood poured out instantly, making her jump up and scramble for her medkit. Checking in on David's fishing setup, other than a pile of tangled kelp, he had absolutely nothing. Worse yet, he lost a hook. If things kept going like this, he'd be forced to tap out soon. Randy was also dealing with a crisis. Ever since sparking his fire yesterday, his ferro rod was MIA. Checking his footage, he realized he accidentally chucked it into the fire pit. Now, it was probably just ash. As a pro survival instructor, what tactical call would he make next? Day 7 hit. Kate took an axe to the hand while chopping wood. A 2-centimeter deep gash was bleeding out nonstop. She could only half sit on the ground, using one shaking hand to open her medkit. She applied a hasty field dressing with paper, then radioed the production crew for a medevac. An injury like that, if not treated immediately, could permanently cripple her hand. Luckily, the crew arrived fast. After touching down, they rapidly administered first aid and evac'd Kate to a hospital for further treatment. This also meant Kate had to officially tap out of the challenge. You can always make money back, but losing your life is never worth it. Electrician Larry wouldn't face a tragedy like this, because after every use, he sheathed his axe in its safety cover. Right now, Larry was plotting his second camp relocation. This time, it was because his shelter was too close to the creek. At night, the babbling water kept waking him up, ruining his most critical deep sleep cycles. Perfect timing, because a few days ago, while scouting the mountain, he found a prime, tactically sound spot behind the ridge. Blocked the wind and water. With just a little modification, it could become a shelter that was warm and dead quiet. It was raining and the mountain trail was slick. Larry pounded stakes in as he went for traction. Then he shouldered his gear and humped it all the way to the prime spot in one push. First, he strung his rain tarp over a large tree, then hiked out and hauled back 2 logs for support pillars. Who knew that on the way back, he'd get whipped by a branch, slip down the mountain, and almost get a one-way ticket out of here? Larry rubbed his chest, hurting badly, absolutely furious. Cursing the whole way, he scrambled up and aggressively slammed the tree that tripped him. Next up is participant number 9, Nicole. The wild jungle is basically her second home. She's a primitive survival instructor and also a hunting guide in Africa, having lived long-term with indigenous tribes. By foraging her own medicinal herbs, she managed to keep her multiple sclerosis in check. Joining the challenge wasn't just to prove her grit, but also to stack cash to buy beef for her growing kids. On day 1, right after drop-off, she already built a spacious, bomb-proof base camp. Look at that intricate roof structure, looks exactly like a slick bachelor pad. Living in the wild for years, she mastered the skill of locating targets by sound. Just by listening to bird calls, she knows if there's an active threat nearby. Tracking the alarm calls, she hit the riverbank and spotted a massive bear chowing down on a meal on the far side. Seeing that, she didn't flinch. Instead, she was actually concerned about whether the bear's macros were balanced. If it wanted to stay healthy, it should take notes from her and eat more greens. The final participant to drop is Josie. One look at his hat and you know he's a cowboy. But in reality, he's also a survival instructor. Over the last 20 years, he's traveled across various primitive tribes, absorbing their survival skills. As for how well he learned them, we'll have to let this challenge put him to the test. Right now, he's digging up small roots to craft cordage, stripping the bark, coiling them up, and soaking them in water to increase their tensile strength. Seeing his small fire struggling, he decided to craft a blowpipe to boost it. Used his axe to split a solid piece of wood in half, hollowed out the core, left small holes at both ends, then put it back together and lashed it tight. Just like that, a 3-foot blowpipe was fully operational. With a light blow, the fire roared like it was on steroids. Looking at the way he held the blowpipe, if you didn't know better, you'd think he was hitting a massive bong. Camera cuts back to Randy. Losing his ferro rod was absolutely not an excuse to tap out, because this guy had a trick up his sleeve. We just saw him grinding on some tree bark for a bit, foraging around the area, and quickly assembling a bow drill kit with a hearthboard. Even carved out an air notch. Planted his size 10 boot on it and initiated the drill. You can't even tell if the smoke coming up is from the wood or from his massive foot. After grinding away with zero ignition, Randy suspected the bearing block was flawed, causing the fail. So he hit the beach, scouted a rock with a perfect divot, and ran back to base to run it again. After burning enough calories to fuel 2 cows, he finally managed to grind out a few tiny embers. Carefully wrapped it in a grass bird's nest, breathed life into it, and the flame roared back to life, finally letting Randy's highly stressed heart catch a break. 3 days without a single bite of meat. Tracy, who dropped in at 220 pounds, was now down to 218. She broke out the fishing net that had been collecting dust, planning to exploit the low tide to score some savory protein. Rolled the net onto a log, marched down to the beach following her pre-planned vector, and deployed the trap. Maintaining that kind of mass out here is a serious grind. When the tide rolled out that afternoon, Tracy couldn't wait and sprinted out to check. Looking ahead, a massive wild crab and a small carp were caught in the net. This had her hyped beyond belief. No prep needed, just chopped it into chunks and threw it in the pot to boil. Boiled it over high heat, then slowly savored it. The protein macro here was 5 times that of beef. In a flash, it was nightfall. Tracy was asleep when a strange noise woke her up. Fully alert, she clearly heard a massive bear growling right outside her tent. Panicking, she instantly grabbed her bear spray and a flare to drive it off. Intimidated by the flare, the black bear had no choice but to turn tail and run. But facing the temptation of 220 pounds of human meat, would they come back for round 2? At midnight on day 7, the sound of a black bear woke Tracy up again. Snapping to, she immediately grabbed a flare and counterattacked. Met with Tracy's hardcore defense, the black bear finally had to bug out. But Tracy didn't feel a sense of victory. Instead, she cried tears of regret. Years on the force, she'd faced plenty of life-or-death situations, but never anything this close. Even though the prize money was massive, if it meant dying out here, that was a hard pass. Back home, she had her dog waiting for her to provide. At this point, Tracy's mental state completely shattered. She immediately radioed the production crew to tap out. When they arrived, she packed her gear, evac'd in a hurry, and swore she'd never return. Day 8. By now, only 7 players were left on the board. Mike was still deep in a sweet dream. Last night in his dream, he was kissing his wife Barbara. Who knew that waking up, he'd find a slug crawling across his lips? Mike was instantly nauseated. Having his dream ruined was one thing, but he was terrified this would leave psychological trauma every time he kissed in the future. Today, Mike decided to do a massive overhaul of his base camp. First up, a firewood drying rack. Sorted the wood into 3 sizes and racked them to dry. This guaranteed he'd have dry wood on hand every day. If you want to eat well, you need a legit kitchen. He used 4 wooden stakes as pillars, 2 crossbeams for the frame, then sawed a massive 3-foot log to use as a prep table. Then he paved the prep area with rocks he scrounged from the beach. In under half an hour, a rugged field kitchen was fully operational. Test boiled a pot of water worked perfectly. If he bagged a bird and made a rotisserie chicken, it would be absolutely elite. Not just that, he repurposed a scavenged plastic bottle, rigged it up with paracord and a stick, and built a semi-automatic hand washing station. Just step on the foot pedal and water dispenses automatically, perfectly solving the hygiene issue pre- and post-meals. Sitting at the dining table in his living room, with a fireplace on one side and his kitchen on the other. Looking at his shelter fully decked out in handcrafted wilderness furniture, he couldn't help but feel a little regret. If he had dropped in a year or 2 earlier, permanently settling here wouldn't be an issue at all. Over in his sector, David hadn't slept all night because of hunger, looking completely haggard. In his sleep-deprived haze, he swore he could smell fried chicken and cornbread. He hit the beach, relentlessly flipping rocks, desperate to scavenge some seafood to fill the void. But ended up with 0 loot. Now his only hope was the gill net. But when he got to the shore, he was crushed to see the net completely empty, not even a scrap of seaweed. He was absolutely gutted. But that fail helped him pinpoint the flaw. The mesh size was way too small. Big fish couldn't get in. Small fish slipped right through. To actually trap wild carp, he decided to use some old scavenged rope to weave a brand new net. He crafted a net needle out of cedar and systematically wove the net along a main line, repeating the sequence to create the mesh. His technique was so clean, even veteran fishermen would have to pay respects. However, he ran out of paracord and could only finish half the net. But with skills like that, the day he feasts on fat fish is right around the corner. Cutting to Justin, ever since he released that Donald duck, he hadn't eaten a single bite of meat. Looked like he was losing his mind, smiling like a maniac. A bit later, he hit the river to check his gill net. The second he arrived, he was grinning ear to ear. Turns out, he snagged a wild carp that weighed a solid 5.5 pounds. The wild part? He didn't use a net. He used his sleeping hammock. Fishing net by day, bed by night. Talk about maxing out utility. He gutted the fish, field dressed it, and dropped it in his pot. Planned to haul it back to base to cook and thoroughly enjoy his first seafood feast in 8 days. Seeing everyone else scoring massive meals, Larry wasn't about to be outdone. Right now, he was crafting a highly lethal weapon. Carved one end of a log, clamped the branch, and sharpened the cut end. creating a spear that could gig a fish or fight off a tiger. Done with that, he hit the beach to check his gill net. Not sure if it was on purpose or a mistake, but Larry somehow managed to fumble a fat shark right back into the ocean. Looks like he's going hungry again today. Day 9. The chore Nicole had to do every day was carve a notch in her log. Tired of eating clams, seaweed, and tiny crabs, she had to start thinking bigger. Experience told her if you want to feast, you gotta set your net where the resources are. She decided to drop her gill net right in black bear territory. But before she could finish setting it, the tide rolled in, forcing her to retreat to shore in frustration. Looking at the half-set net dangling there, whether it caught fish or not was entirely up to fate. Meanwhile, Larry was starving, his stomach touching his spine. Not relying on a gill net, he hit the jackpot with fish traps, a hand-sized carp, and then another. 3 fish traps brought him 3 wild carp. That night, he roasted one to eat immediately. Another went into a soup, saved for breakfast the next day. Tasting the roasted fish, crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, it was so good he almost swallowed his tongue. Time ticked over to day 10. Nicole hit the riverbank bright and early to check her net. From a distance, she spotted a family of black bears on the opposite bank. She took the initiative to say hi to the mama bear, then stealthily crept toward her net. But barely 30 feet in, the mama bear stood up on her hind legs, entering full combat mode. That sight scared Nicole so bad she nearly wet herself. She turned and bolted, not daring to look back. What tactical approach would she use next? Could she really snatch food back from a bear's mouth? Moving to day 11. 7 survivalists left. Today, Nicole woke up earlier than usual, carved the day into a branch, and pushed back into black bear territory. After yesterday's terrifying encounter, she made sure to head out early today, hoping to clear her gill net while the bears were still asleep. She hadn't even reached the spot from the day before when she saw something thrashing in the net. Moving closer to take a look. Holy smokes! In her whole life, she had never seen a salmon this massive. Had to be pushing 20-something pounds. Hyped beyond belief, she went to pull the fish out, but as she got close, it thrashed violently, splashing water everywhere. Pissed off, she grabbed a heavy rock and smashed it right on the fish's head. But the fish refused to quit. She had to pull out her machete to end its run quickly. Looking at this massive fish, she had enough rations to feast for 3 days. The head could even be used for fish soup. She gutted and cleaned the fish right there on the riverbank. Hauling it back to camp, she threw half in the pot to boil. The other half she skewered on a rack to smoke over cedar wood, the epic smell drifting through the jungle. The second it was cooked, she hurried to take a bite. It was so good she almost swallowed her tongue. As for Randy, ever since he mastered the friction fire drill, whether he had food or not, he had to spark a fire every day to stay warm. He started plotting for long-term survival. A warm, solid shelter was an absolute must. He pounded stakes into the ground, lashed them tight, measured out the shelter footprint, and stacked multiple logs like a cabin wall. He angled the sides to form a sloped roof. His tiny log cabin was finally fully operational, super comfortable and completely mortgage-free. Done building, he was starving. He remembered the mousetrap from earlier, checked it, and found absolutely nothing. The right ear of the bait was gone, but the trap hadn't tripped. He started thinking about eating those tiny fish just to sustain life. Luckily, when he checked the second trap, a fat mouse was lying dead inside. Back at camp, no heavy processing needed. He roasted it straight on the hot coals until the outside was charred black, then peeled the skin off, left with a tiny scrap of meat, barely a couple of ounces, eating it crispy. Packed with over 10 times the protein of beef, while munching on his wilderness snack, he brainstormed his next tactical move. Winter was coming. Other animals would go into hibernation. Only fish would be somewhat easy to catch. Moving to day 12, Justin, the guy who put entertainment above all else, didn't care about food at all. Right now, he was role-playing Tarzan, swinging on vines through the jungle like a playground. To stay in shape, he even built an outdoor gym on the beach. Used a scavenged iron chain to do 500 pulls a day, working his pecs and biceps. Lifted a heavy boulder 200 times for glute work to keep that tight physique. Then did a cross-country trail run, carrying weight for 3 miles, plus 100 pull-ups. Burning calories at this insane rate without any protein intake meant he'd likely have to tap out sooner or later. While the other survivalists gradually stabilized their camps, David was struggling like a beggar. Hadn't seen a single fish scale in days. Could only scavenge a little kelp and seaweed to scrape by. After eating, he immediately found a spot to lay down and rest to conserve energy, while looking for a prime location with good vibes. He had thought about tapping out, but thinking about his 3 kids back home, he forced himself to get up. Even knowing it was a long shot, he decided to rig a DIY fishing rod to test his luck. Maybe the man upstairs was afraid he'd starve to death, so he actually let him hook a wild fish, weighing in at a solid 5.5 pounds. That fish showing up was an absolute lifesaver. He rigged a makeshift prep table, gutted the fish, hauled it back to camp, threw it in the pot, and started cooking. Any survival pro knows exactly why he boiled it instead of roasting it. He picked up the steaming bowl of fish head soup and took a massive gulp. His dark, depressing mood instantly vanished. Meanwhile, Nicole could feel the air getting progressively colder. Surviving long-term out in the wild, her gut told her extreme weather was incoming. Before it hit, she had to reinforce her shelter. She used a row of logs and nylon paracord to frame out a solid door for the shelter. Then she packed both walls thick with cedar boughs, providing insulation and waterproofing. On the morning of day 13, sure enough, a brutal storm rolled in. Good thing she upgraded her base camp in advance, so inside, she was completely untouched by the elements. Even with the harsh weather, foraging for food couldn't be ignored. The second she stepped out, she saw trees violently swaying. Hitting the beach, she saw the sand completely swallowed by the ocean swell. In this scenario, staying alive takes priority. Over in his sector, David was originally planning to fish, but seeing the raging sea, he froze in his tracks. His fishing spot from yesterday was now deep underwater. Even his beachside field kitchen got washed away. Looks like today was going to be another starving day, but true badasses don't fear heavy surf and high winds. Seeing his net full of kelp about to be ripped away by the waves, Josie couldn't hold back anymore. To keep his hopes of winning alive, he didn't hesitate to dive right into the ocean, battling the brutal waves until pitch dark. Finally, he managed to secure his fishing gear. As a reward for his guts, the net gifted him a salmon. Back at camp, he gave it a quick prep, cooked it, and happily chowed down. Surprisingly, this guy had some serious chopstick skills. Probably because this fish was so incredibly hard to score, Josie felt it tasted better than any fish he'd ever eaten. After the storm, what kind of tactics will the survivalist pull out next? Who will ultimately walk away with the $500,000 prize? Fast forward to day 15. Mike, the guy owning a wilderness mansion, easily rode out the storm. Taking advantage of the clear skies, he scouted the shoreline, hoping to scavenge some cool loot to decorate the pad. Turns out, after some searching, he spotted a massive black plastic tub. Even though the bottom was blown out, the rest was basically brand new. Seeing that, his brain instantly sparked an idea. If he could modify it into a watercraft, catching not just perch, but even sharks would be a breeze. Talk is cheap, time to work. He lashed branches around the tub for a frame, strapped 2 heavy logs to the sides to max out buoyancy and stability. A wooden box yacht was officially commissioned. Mike eagerly piloted his box into its maiden voyage. Against the rolling ocean swells, the tiny craft remained incredibly stable. It got him so hyped, he literally started dancing on the spot, putting on a show like, "Look how big I'm playing this." His next objective was utilizing his mini yacht to score a savory shark dinner. Less than 5 miles from Mike, Josie had witnessed Mike's overpowered tactics firsthand. Ever since he housed that salmon last time, he couldn't forget the taste of fresh fish. Staring at the bay across the way, a known turtle and fish transit lane. However, to secure an unlimited fish and turtle buffet, he needed to craft a watercraft to cross the channel. With no plastic tub for a hull, he had to rely entirely on wood to build the frame. He used 2 cedar saplings, shaved them down into slats for the outer ribs, and used brace poles to push the structure out from the inside. Just as the boat was taking shape, suddenly snap! A pine strut shattered instantly, making his mood instantly tank. Days of backbreaking labor down the drain, and he ended up completely empty-handed. In another sector, Randy, with a face full of hair looking like a legit wild man, had been deep in the bush for days. Aside from eating 1 roasted field mouse, he hadn't tasted a single piece of fish. Taking this opportunity, he checked the fishing traps he had set up earlier. Truly an outdoor survival instructor, with just 1 pull, he hauled in a fat, silver fish. Its ancestors were sharks living millions of years ago. Technically, he was eating wild shark. Just like that, he had secured enough rations for 2 days without stressing. However, once one need gets fulfilled, another emptiness sets in. After getting a full stomach, right on cue, Randy started getting homesick. Fast forward to day 17, Larry's camp started getting raided by mice. The rodents kept squeaking all night long, ruining any chance of a solid sleep. Dealing with these wild rodents, Larry had absolutely zero interest in trapping them. After thinking it through, he decided to pull up stakes and relocate camp for the 3rd time. This time, it was an audible called on the fly, with no time to scout a prime location first. He just had to hump it through the timber. No idea how far. A flat patch of ground appeared right in front of Larry. With a food source and fresh water right in his face, this was definitely another highly tactical LZ. Without a word, he immediately got to work building base camp. After lashing a ridgepole between 2 massive trees, he threw his rain tarp over it, cut 2 more straight poles to reinforce it into a familiar, simple A-frame. The only difference this time was an extra crossbeam in the middle. However, during construction, the log lengths didn't match up, making him absolutely furious. After regaining his composure, the construction grind had to continue. To kill his thoughts of tapping out and going home, Randy started upgrading his shelter to redirect his focus. He built a frame out of solid logs, packed the gap with leaves, and laid his rain tarp on top as a mattress pad. Finally, he rolled out his sleeping bag on top. Just like that, he crafted the first bed in the history of wilderness survival. Soft, cushy, and comfortable. But that comfort just made him miss home even more. To reset his mind and body, he decided to build a backcountry sweat lodge. He used cedar branches to form a 10-foot diameter ring, then lashed 8 saplings over it to frame the dome. Then covered it with a tarp to create a fully sealed environment. Next, he transferred river rocks that had been heated to 400 degrees straight into the sweat lodge, brought some water inside, and initiated his physical and spiritual detox. After letting the heavy sweat pour out, he plunged straight into the freezing river, shocking his system with a brutal temperature swing, hitting day 19. Larry, who had just relocated to his new base, woke up early for a morning workout. You could tell he was super hyped about his new camp, an unlimited supply of fresh water, fat, hand-sized bolete mushrooms. The only thing missing was fish. However, luckily, he still had a stash of seaweed. Combined with the mushrooms, he could boil up a legit seafood mushroom stew. At night, the clever Larry set up a mini kitchen under a tree. Even though the mushroom soup smelled incredible, it couldn't fully kill Larry's craving for heavy calories. He was still dreaming of a real wild game feast. On the morning of day 20, he scrambled to stomp out a fire when he saw his shelter glowing bright red. If it weren't for Vancouver's insanely damp climate, he probably would have been packed in a body bag by now. Taking advantage of a moment when the camera wasn't rolling, Josie had stealthily finished the outer frame of his boat, prepping his watercraft before the next fish run hit. Today, he had to knock out the remaining components, shaved cedar branches down into wooden slats, sprinkled some water on the surface, then roasted them over the fire, heating them up to bend them into the exact shape needed, slotted them into the hull frame, then lashed them tight with paracord. Finally, all he had to do was skin it with a rain tarp, and he'd be ready to launch and start fishing. Time jumped to day 21. With his wilderness mansion and mini yacht operational, Mike had zero stress about shelter or rations, but he was seriously lacking entertainment. This curly-haired dude got creative and crafted a DIY board game, keeping his morale up playing solo. Once he got bored of that, he casually grabbed a few strands of kelp for a snack. Not just that, he even used massive scavenge buoys to play beach bowling. But over time, grinding through this exact same routine every single day made him feel like life out here had lost its meaning. He figured living like a mindless zombie was worse than just heading back to his wife Barbara early. With that mindset, Mike decided to tap out of the challenge. Struggling with the exact same mental block as Mike was Randy, who also couldn't handle the complete lack of human interaction for such an extended deployment. Starved of any mental or emotional fuel, Randy finally realized that this wasn't the life he wanted to be living. At this point, all hesitation vanished. He immediately radioed the production crew. When he hoisted his pack onto his shoulders, it felt like he had gained something, but also like he had lost something deep. With 2 heavy hitters dropping out, how will the remaining survivalists manage to conquer the brutal gauntlet of this wilderness, pushing their survival skills and starvation tolerance to the absolute limit? Who will hold the line until the very end? Time shifts to day 22. We're down to 5 operators left in the field. Ever since his lucky break landing that wild carp, David had 0 caloric intake for 4 straight days. He had to rely purely on sleeping to conserve his core energy. By now, his brain was getting foggy. While he still had a sliver of stamina left, he pushed down to the shoreline, scavenged some wild clams to get some quick energy, crushed them all in seconds, but the yield was pathetic. Nowhere near enough to replace the massive calorie deficit over the past few days. Done eating, he laid completely still, waiting for his starve for 3 days, feast for 1 survival passive to recharge. Pretty soon, he got his wind back and resumed the project he left hanging, finishing his gill net. Once it was fully functional, he hauled the net down to the ocean, spliced it with his old, smaller net to try and trap wild carp, hoping to score a catch, but if not, no sweat, because his starvation tolerance could keep him in the game. Camera cuts over to Justin. Not only did he have 0 rations, he also had to suffer through his shelter flooding, completely soaked. The fire pit he used for cooking could literally function as a fish tank right now. And worst of all, his sleeping bag was totally saturated. Left with 0 options, he had to wrap the wet sleeping bag tight around his body and spark a fire to warm up, hoping to dry the bag out using his own body heat combined with the fire. However, that tactical play completely failed. Then he remembered his hammock, which he had repurposed as a gill net. He immediately hit the river to check it. Sure enough, it caught nothing but seaweed. Since it was completely useless for fishing, he decided to convert it back to its original hammock form. If you can't eat good, you gotta at least sleep good. Survival 101. After fixing it, he lashed it to the main support pillars of his shelter. Lying in it, he could still smell that heavy fishy aroma. Now he didn't have to worry about dreaming without carp. As a military vet, Justin thrived on pushing himself to the limit. His next objective, summiting the mountain behind his camp. Josie's boat had its skeletal frame fully locked in. Next step was skinning it with the rain tarp so it could glide freely over the ocean swells. Paranoid that hidden hazards in deep water might shred the hull, he specifically bolted on 2 impact-resistant skid plates to the bottom. Used scavenged sea bones, ground them down into a needle, combined with heavy-duty fishing line, to stitch the skid plates rock solid to the hull. Truly a master craftsman who's traveled the world. Compared to standard fishing skiffs, the rig he built could legitimately rival a professional racing hull, pushing into day 23. After coexisting in the same sector for over 20 days, Nicole and the local black bear had basically become close friends, totally locked in on each other's daily routines. Once the bear moved out of the zone, she stealthily went to check her gill net. The old saying goes, farmers die from the sun, bakers die from the fire, and fishing nets? This time, it snagged another massive 20-pound salmon. You really gotta wonder, did the black bear just string this fish up for her? Or was it just habit the fish naturally feeding the camp? Back at base, she devoured it raw, 0 seasoning needed. A lunch that seemed totally standard to her was the absolute dream for every other competitor out here. Eating so much fatty salmon, her stomach was bound to feel a bit heavy. Taking advantage of the clear, sunny weather, she decided to forage some wild greens to detox her system. Tracking along the creek into the timber, she suddenly kicked up a massive splash of water. Startled, she spun around and saw a huge salmon. Gotta admit, her fish hunting aura is absolutely unmatched. Walk 3 steps and fish literally deliver themselves to her. However, right now she was completely burnt out on fish, only wanted to eat veggies, and quickly located an edible wild plant. Not only edible, but it doubles as field medicine, primarily used to treat ulcers and improve poor digestion, perfectly matched for her current physical condition. She hurriedly harvested a huge bunch to haul back to camp. On the other side of the island, Justin kicked off his mountain summit mission. Because the trail was slick and the timber was dense, he had to take it slow, grinding it out step by step. After all, if he slipped and took a hard fall, the whole village could start prepping for a funeral feast. Before that thought even finished, he took a brutal spill into the dirt. Luckily, the drop wasn't high, so he was good, but the impact left him seeing stars. He had to lay there for a bit before struggling back up to keep pushing. 3 hours later, he finally summited the peak. Staring at the epic view of clouds blending into the horizon, he let out a massive, hyped-up yell. In that moment, all the grueling effort was 100% worth it. Riding that adrenaline high, after descending the mountain, he broke down his entire shelter, shouldered over 400 pounds of timber, and basically sprinted to a high point with better tactical terrain. Used massive trees as primary pillars, framed out a rough structure, and slung his hammock inside. The second he laid down, the exhaustion of the day crashed over him, and he passed out hard. At low tide that evening, David couldn't wait any longer and immediately went to check his gill net. The result? Not only did he catch 0 fish, but his net was severely shredded. He forced down the crushing wave of disappointment, hauled the busted net back to base camp, and started field repairs. Watching the net slowly get stitched back together, a shred of hope started creeping back in. Carrying the repaired net back to the ocean, he deployed it in the exact same spot. What blows my mind is why he wouldn't scout a new drop zone. Moving into day 24. Fate really loves messing with the desperate. David's net got annihilated again by a massive piece of driftwood. Getting hit with back-to-back catastrophic failures pushed his morale to the absolute breaking point. He tilted his head up at a 4-5-degree angle to stop the tears from falling. To secure a better life for his kids, he absolutely refused to tap out. And while his net was failing, Nicole was hauling in a massive 20-pound salmon almost every single day. Maybe living without the stress of securing food and shelter made Nicole suddenly shift her mindset. She decided to release this poor salmon back into the river. Little did she know, this act of mercy planted a massive hidden risk that would force her to tap out later on. The remaining operators are all hardened, elite hunters, pushing through extreme physical and mental gauntlets. Who will grind it out to the end and secure the $500,000 cash prize? Hitting day 31, 5 survivalists remain. Larry, who just relocated, was busy clearing out his backyard area. Ever since moving to this camp, his gill net had pulled 0 fish. He practically forgot what meat even tasted like. The seagulls cruising overhead now just looked like flying rotisserie chickens to him. In a foggy moment of hunger, he remembered the field mouse he spotted outside camp. Instantly grabbed sticks and paracord, combined them with a heavy boulder and a tree stump, and rigged a simple deadfall mousetrap. He placed a chunk of snail meat as bait. The second the mouse moves in and hits the bait, the boulder drops, but will instantly squash it flat as a pancake. Honestly, he didn't even know if this setup would actually work, since it was his first time running this kind of trap. Until that afternoon, when he checked the trap and found the snail meat completely gone, but not a single mouse hair under the rock. All signs confirmed there were mice in the AO. Refusing to give up, Larry reset the deadfall, hoping to crush a little mouse tonight. As night fell, the sound of a dropping rock shattered the dead silence. Larry rushed out of his shelter, and after a frantic scramble, you could tell from his massive height that he had successfully bagged a mouse. Satisfied with the protein, Larry headed back to camp. Moving to day 32, was David losing his mind? He was suddenly screaming at thin air. Turns out, he just saw a mink carrying an eel. He hoped to scare it into dropping the fish by making noise. But the mink didn't care about his yelling. David's stomach was aching from starvation, leaving him no choice but to eat kelp from the bay. Even though eating too much would wreck his stomach, he had absolutely zero options left right now. No matter how brutal life got, he never once thought about tapping out. He used every resource around him to craft a simple fishing pole. The rocks along the shoreline might look like nothing, but they were the perfect hiding spot for crabs. Using freshly scavenged bait, David started fishing. Before long, he hooked a massive king crab. Looking down into the water, he realized it was a crab hole. Without hesitation, David went straight into combat mode. Who would have thought? This minor comeback would change the entire game. In less than half an hour, he hauled in every crab in the hole. David screamed in victory. He was back in the fight, ran back and prepped a massive crab feast. He couldn't wait to devour the meal. Hitting day 33. After half a month, Josie's boat was finally complete. The hull was so flimsy that a small fox could easily puncture it. How would it actually perform? Only a sea trial would tell. Carrying his newly crafted boat to the shore, he gave it one last thorough gear check. Right as it hit the water, the hull was wobbling, but a moment later, he locked in his balance. Paddling further offshore, the boat suddenly rocked violently, spooking him enough to paddle straight back to shore. Protecting his life was priority one. The main issue was that he lacked a component to maintain stability. Back at camp, Josie started scavenging materials to build outriggers, and finally found a round piece of foam washed up on the beach. Combined with a plastic jug he scavenged a few days ago, he strapped both items to the rear sides of the boat. A seemingly minor upgrade, but it increased the stability of his little yacht tenfold. Josie happily paddled out, covering over 12 miles. As night fell, Larry finally caught a lucky break. After enduring days of brutal grinding, he not only had fish and crab, but also trapped a wild mouse. Sure enough, when luck hits, nothing can stop it. After harvesting his protein, he was about to head back to cook when suddenly, the trap snapped again with a loud noise. Unbelievably, he bagged another mouse. Even survival pros would have a hard time pulling that off. Hitting day 35. Justin, the guy focused entirely on workouts and hiking, had gone nearly half a month without meat. Just when I thought he was a man of steel, he finally hit the beach at low tide. Even though shore snails couldn't beat wild carp, he gathered a full pot. He didn't head straight back to camp. He cracked the snails and boiled them over high heat with zero seasoning. And surprisingly, the meal didn't taste bad at all. Biting into it, it was as tender as grilled squid. According to the laws of wilderness survival, when you get a full stomach, you start getting homesick. Justin was no exception. Now that he had eaten his fill and had his fun, he had nothing to do but sleep to kill time. And in dreams, it's easy for your mind to wander. Finally, after singing a song about missing home, he decided to tap out of the challenge. The mission he set for himself was accomplished. Staying any longer was just burning time. And he was always looking forward to a new adventure. The production crew's boat slowly pulled in, marking the end of Justin's challenge and opening the door to a new adventure. With Justin gone, only 4 operators remained in the game. David, who turned the tide, Larry, who hit a lucky streak, Josie, with the assist from his boat, and Nicole, who threw fish back after catching them. Who will secure the final victory? Fast forward to day 35. 4 operators are still in the fight. David is arguably the most resilient competitor this season. With rock-solid faith, he pushed through the brutal phase and finally feasted on king crab. Not only that, he unlocked a hidden master fishing skill. With just a simple fishing rod, he could catch absolutely anything. Just 2.5 minutes after casting his line, a 1-pound perch took the bait. Seeing plenty of fish still swimming below, David decided to exploit the opportunity and stockpile winter rations. Before long, another perch was hooked. In a short time, he had enough fish for dinner. However, right as David hooked his 3rd fish and was prepping to head back to cook, he realized his first 2 fish were MIA. Damn it, how could there be a fish thief out here in the wild? David couldn't believe it. He only had 1 perch left to carry back to camp. Back at camp, the more he thought about it, the crazier it seemed. Fish that were just hauled ashore definitely couldn't jump back into the water on their own. Highly likely, it was an eagle that swooped down and snatched his fish when he wasn't looking. Rage flared up, and he cursed violently. The next morning, David set a new objective. Today he was going to catch a few massive crabs to make up for the lost fish. After prepping his fishing line, he hit the spot where he previously caught crabs and started fishing. But he didn't catch any crabs. Instead, he hooked a small perch. Left with no choice, he kept casting. A bit later, he hooked another tiny half-pound perch. He asked himself, why is this so hard? I just want crab. Why is it so damn hard? Then he came up with a different tactic. Used the small fish body he just caught as bait. Tied the head and bones to the line to use as a lure. However, when he hurled it out, the entire spool of line in his right hand slipped into the water. Panicking, David dove straight into the water to recover it, but his reaction time just wasn't fast enough. The result, not only did he fail to catch crab, he lost a spool of line and got completely soaked. David had to retreat to camp to dry his gear over a roaring fire. Life changes way too fast. David found it hard to adapt, hitting day 37. Nicole, who hadn't eaten fish in days, was now so hyped she couldn't stop grinning. Before the tide rolled out, she saw with her own eyes a salmon swim right into her net. The second the tide dropped, she rushed out to retrieve the net. However, when she got there, she only found a lonely fish head stuck in the mesh. The entire body had mysteriously vanished. While she was still trying to process it, a head broke the surface of the water, making Nicole instantly realize what went down. But it didn't end there. When she came back the next day, the net wasn't just empty. Something had ripped a massive hole right through it. She didn't even have to think about it. It was definitely the work of a seal again. However, she decided to pivot to another sector to scout for fresh hope. The days of feasting on fish and meat were over. Now she could only scrape by on a bit of seaweed. It was only now she realized she had completely missed the salmon run. Looking back at when she released that massive fish, she felt absolute, crushing regret. Hitting day 39. After a few days of repairs and upgrades, Josie's boat was now fully dialed in. It was time to test its performance. Josie, with expert handling, cut through the rough surf and quickly reached his coordinates. When he hit the beach, he only saw a few scraps of salmon carcasses on the ground. And not a single salmon broke the surface of the water. All his grueling work felt like it was washed down the drain. He felt lost, unsure of what tactical move to make next. However, he didn't give up. After regaining his focus, he continues to scout ahead. Based on the massive seal presence around him, he knew for a fact this area was loaded with fish. To prove his theory right, Josie crafted a bamboo rig and took it out to the middle of the bay to fish. After 4 hours of grinding, he hauled in a massive fish, securing his rations for the next 2 days. This indirectly confirmed that Josie's earlier intel was dead accurate. Hitting day 40, Larry stood by the fire, looking completely zoned out, his hands fidgeting endlessly. Ever since he relocated here, his daily grind consisted of sawing wood, cooking, drinking cold water, or just staring blankly into the distance. The monotonous routine had slowly drained Larry's willpower, making him feel like he'd lost his purpose for living. He couldn't hold back his tears. This deployment made him reflect on his bland, repetitive life after getting married. Over the past 20 years, he had never brought a single surprise to his wife. Filled with absolute regret, Larry traced his wife's name in the sand, using this moment to express the deep remorse and love in his heart. Hitting day 51. As David sat by the river adjusting his fishing line, 2 mink suddenly darted right behind his back. David reacted instantly, yelling out that next time they showed up, he'd definitely bag both of them at once. Ever since he earned the title of fishing prodigy, he hadn't taken his hands off his gear for a single minute. The premium meals from before were now just top-tier crab bait. After scouting the area, David located another crab hideout. Running the same textbook tactical maneuvers, the crabs in the pool followed David's bait and swarmed in one after another. In less than half an hour, he had hauled in an armful of fresh crab. Hitting day 52. Winter on Vancouver Island had quietly rolled in. After days without any heavy protein, Nicole was shivering while gathering dry firewood. When she had plenty of fish, she didn't catch any. Now the run was over, and catching fish or turtles was impossible. To replenish her massive, long-term protein deficit, she decided to hike down the trail to see if she could scavenge any scraps left behind by black bears. She hiked while yelling loudly to warn off any nearby bears. Who knew that after a full sweep, she wouldn't find fish, but cougar tracks instead? She stopped caring about fish or meat and instantly turned and bolted. Seeing her fish scavenging op go up in smoke, she had to fall back on her old skills and forage for wild plants. Too bad winter had already hit. All the edible flora had completely withered and died. Looking back on the days when she had fish for every meal, now she couldn't even scrounge up grass fast enough. The brutal contrast hit Nicole so hard she couldn't hold back tears. Starting on day 53, Vancouver Island switched back into storm mode. A sudden hailstorm hit before anyone could even react. Faced with this scenario, everyone was forced to hunker down in their shelters, waiting to ride out the storm. Hitting day 57, the production crew's skiff sped in. Just as expected, it was Nicole who couldn't hold the line. Zero rations forced her to tap out of the wilderness. She wasn't the first, and she definitely won't be the last. A flawless start that she totally fumbled into a complete mess. This outcome was sealed the exact moment she threw that fish back. With Nicole tapping out, only 3 operators remain. Who will hold the line until the bitter end and emerge victorious? Hitting day 57, only the final 3 competitors are left in the field. Ever since maxing out his fishing skill tree, David was basically free to do whatever he wanted in the wild. While killing time between catches, he even crafted a weapon out of scavenged nails. Not only could it be used for close quarters combat, its ultimate feature was prying open sea clams. Other than sleeping and eating, David dumped all his remaining time into fishing. Thanks to his elite fishing intuition, he quickly secured his first kill of the day. Even though this wasn't his first time, seeing a wild carp this massive made it impossible for David to hide his hype. With the arrival of this salmon, the endgame of the challenge was slowly coming into focus. However, David kept a frosty demeanor and quietly kept casting his line. With his mindset completely locked in, he quickly hauled in a second fish. Back at camp, he calmly processed the catch. Who cares about eating at a high-end restaurant? It can't beat devouring a fresh fish feast deep in the wild. However, a life without worrying about rations isn't completely without its drawbacks. When your physical needs are fully met, mental emptiness hits hard. Realizing this, David could only keep fishing to try and suppress those thoughts. Meanwhile, over in his sector, Larry was getting mentally tortured to the point of breaking. He was talking to thin air, waving his arms around, acting out scenarios in his head. Unable to hold back, Larry went out to check his mouse traps again. Who knew his luck was so bad that even the mice stopped showing up? The picky little rodents completely bailed on his camp. Refusing to accept it, Larry hit the river to check his net. However, with the temperatures dropping rapidly, the fish had already pushed into deep water to winter over. The bait in his net was completely untouched. Since that was the case, Larry decided to eat whatever he had, hauling all the bait back to camp to process. After tossing it in the pan, he had a rare wilderness stir-fry. That night, lying in bed, tossing and turning under brutal physical and mental pressure, Larry's eyes slowly glazed over. The next morning while chopping wood, Larry finally couldn't take it anymore and completely broke down. He had grinded with everything he had, tried every possible tactical play to score food, but still couldn't break the stalemate. Larry, totally helpless, could only fall to his knees and pray to the sky, hoping for a miracle to drop. Time marched on to day 58. Josie was rationing his last piece of fatty fish to hold off starvation, but he knew he had to secure his next food source as soon as possible. He planned to push back out to sea to hunt wild fish, but the violent swells forced him to stand down. However, he remembered the gill net he had deployed earlier. To make retrieving the net more tactical, he had even rigged up a pulley system. When pulling the net up, he immediately felt something was wrong. And once it was fully hauled in, he realized the entire anchoring system had ripped loose. Facing the surging high tide, he didn't dare risk diving in to reset it. He had to wait for the tide to drop and reassess. Not only did he have zero meat to eat, he also lost his future food pipeline. Now, his only play was waiting for low tide to regroup. Time shifted to day 59. Larry, realizing there was zero hope of a comeback, was absolutely fearless now. He burned through all his firewood, demolished all his emergency rations, and decided that once he finished eating, he'd radio the production crew to tap out. However, after the meal, he stalled. Staring up at the dark, overcast sky, he said if the weather cleared, he'd extract immediately. You could tell he was still clinging to a sliver of hope. But right after that, he was reduced to eating clams and seaweed just to sustain life. Ever since Josie's net became combat ineffective, he had been brainstorming a way to re-anchor it. After running through the options, he decided to wrap foam in waterproof fabric, then tied the bottom of the float to his paracord. This setup could replace the lost net anchors. Mission accomplished, he piloted his boat to the designated coordinates. However, as Josie was hauling the net up, a sudden catastrophic failure occurred, and this fail was the straw that broke the camel's back, making Josie lock in his decision without hesitation. He hit the button and radioed the production crew. In just 2.5 minutes, the extraction boat rushed to his LZ. Standing in front of the camera, Josie just bowed his head and apologized to his family. He changed his clothes and realized he had dropped a massive amount of weight. During his deployment in the wild, he lost more weight than he had in years. Truth is, a boat brought him out here, and a boat was exactly what forced him to leave. If that catastrophic fail hadn't happened, he could have held the line for many more days. Time marched on to day 60. Only 2 operators left in the field. Larry, who had completely lost his mind, bounced between moments of clarity and total mental breakdowns. At this point, he decided to throw a Hail Mary, rigged a fishing line with a float and a rock weight, then engineered a makeshift snare out of fish hooks. Deployed this trap net on the high rocks, attempting to bag a couple of wild birds. If it failed, nobody could stop him from bugging out. On the other side of the island, David, even with solid rations, had a body pushing past 50, making his protein synthesis unable to keep up with his massive calorie burn rate, causing his physical condition to rapidly deteriorate. Even as his body started breaking down in pain, David stayed disciplined with his daily grind. His expert-level fishing tactics helped him hook a wild carp. But while hauling it in too aggressively, the fish slipped the hook and dropped back into the ocean. He instantly jumped up and lunged into the water after it. But not only did he fail to secure the fish, he accidentally blew out his knee on the rocks. For a guy over 50 like David, any injury could result in irreversible, mission-ending damage. Time hit day 64. Larry reflected out loud, never expecting he could hold the line in the wild this long. He looked back on the grueling days, from the brutal struggle to finding a prime camp, from losing carp to roasting makeshift potatoes, from soaring hope to total mental collapse. Right now, he couldn't give a straight answer on exactly how much longer he could endure. As for David, since blowing out his knee, he had been grounded in his shelter recovering, slowly replaying all the brutal hardships he had survived. From starting with zero, to his net getting repeatedly destroyed, from starving in the cold to pulling off a massive comeback. He held the line using his own raw grit and his duty as a father. He had forged a brand new path for himself. As the camera cuts, the production crew's extraction boat appeared again. As for the final outcome, everyone can probably guess. This massive gamble ultimately ended with Larry tapping out. Looking at the big picture, the fact that Larry held out this long was already a shock. If he had better tactical control of his emotions, the outcome might have been totally different. With Larry out of the game, only David remained. Completely in the dark about being the last man standing, he just kept running his daily fishing ops. Right as he was prepping to haul in another fish, he got radioed for a routine med check by the crew. David complied fully and went through a battery of medical tests. Then, he was officially informed he was the winner of the challenge. While David was completely overcome with hype, he spotted someone walking up from behind. When he saw it was his daughter, David couldn't hold it back anymore. All the brutal suffering and joy melted into one massive, tight hug. This challenge wasn't just a promise a father made to his kids. It also proved that age cannot defeat a hardcore, resilient spirit. In the end, David rightfully secured the victory and claimed the prize money of $500,000. That's a wrap on this season. Catch you guys in the next episode. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Goodbye and see you again.